Our readings are taken from Rays of the One Light, the weekly commentaries on the Bible and Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. This week, victory demands the courage of conviction. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Jesus Christ said in the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 10, "Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes shall be they of his own household. He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he that taketh not his cross and followeth after me is not worthy of me. He that findeth, that is to say, that clingeth to, his life shall lose it. And he that loseth, in other words, that giveth up his life for my sake, shall find it." God tests the firmness of our faith. The sword described here is the sword of discrimination. The struggle Jesus describes is not a war against unknown enemies, but the struggle with our own attachment to all that is nearest and dearest to us, humanly speaking. Ultimately, it is a war against the ego itself and against anything with which we surround ourselves to bolster the ego's fragile sense of security. When Yogananda, as a boy, fled to the Himalayas to embrace a life of solitary meditation, he was apprehended by his older brother Ananta and brought home again. At a certain point, before he would accept defeat, he whispered to his friend Amar, his companion on the flight, "Let us slip away when opportunity offers. We can go on foot to Rishikesh." But Amar, whose brother had accompanied Ananta, had turned pessimist, disclaiming any intention of continuing their adventure. Yogananda's memorable comment on Amar's refusal was, "He was enjoying the familial warmth." The spiritual warrior rejects that familial warmth. Rather, he claims the whole universe as his home. As the Bhagavad Gita puts it in the 14th chapter, unaffected by outward joys and sorrows, or by praise and blame, secure in his divine nature, regarding with equal gaze a clod of mud, a stone, and a bar of gold, impartial toward all experiences, whether pleasant or unpleasant, firm-minded, untouched by either praise or blame, treating everyone alike, whether friend or foe, free from the delusion that, in anything he does, he is the doer. Such an one has transcended nature's triune qualities. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om,
How is everybody? more convincing. Nice to see everybody. Nice to spend the morning together. Thank you. So the reading today is provoking, to say the least, especially when the peace and harmony prayer is out there, especially when there's so much turbulence and war in the world and trouble and disharmony everywhere you turn. I think we were all born under the curse of Karna. In the Mahabharata, one of the great epics of India, there is a character, and he represents, he's a great character. He's actually the eldest of the Pandava brothers, the eldest of the noble characters of the story, the good side. He represents, he's born of Kunti and the god of the sun. So he's half divine. And he represents the desire for happiness in this world. It's not the desire for happiness that's the problem. It's the desire for happiness in this world. And what it does is it causes a mist, a cloak to fall across our vision. And we start to see things wrong. So Karna is born to Kunti when she's very young, and she can't keep him. And so she puts him into a basket and puts him in a river, and he floats downstream, and he's raised by Atirata and Radha, a Sudaputra, a chariot driver, and his wife. And they lovingly dote on him and raise him. But he's nobility. He is a warrior by caste. And here he is growing up as a chariot driver. And here we are. We're growing up. We are born. We are born of the sun. We're born of God. We are created of God's stuff, if you will. The consciousness of God has given life to each one of us, an expression to each one of us. And we think we're chariot drivers. We think that we're just here to drive the chariot of our life from point A to point B to get through the days and to adorn the body and feed. And the message of the Masters, the message of all spirituality is to reclaim the kingdom, to remember our divine ancestry. I truly wish we had more than 15, 20, 25 minutes to connect today. In fact, I wish we could just order lunch in and relax and circle up and have some music and share, because this is one of the most compelling topics on the spiritual path. This topic that Jesus introduces through the Bible to his disciples. He's speaking of what it takes to reclaim our true nature. And then what is our true nature? We talk about this week after week, but if we really remembered, we would behave much differently. Our true nature is the joy that we're seeking through outer things. That's our nature. Our true nature is the love that we're seeking outwardly through relationships and through position and through other things. There's nothing wrong with human relationships. This is not a doctrine of self-abnegation. It's a matter of beginning to look and see things appropriately. Our problem is we're always trying to get from life that which it is not designed to give. We want love. Everybody wants love. Love is our birthright. It is the quality of the very fabric of our nature. We just keep trying to get it from sources that it can't come purely from, and so it's dissatisfying. Everybody has been at one time or another involved in a relationship where the person is just clinging to you and trying to get from you that which you cannot give. And it just feels horrible. You just want to go wipe it off someplace. Just get rid of it. Because we know intuitively from deep inside, we are not the source of joy. We're not the source of love. And yet everybody knows that can be sourced. It has to be able to be sourced. And so the Masters come and they tell us, you're looking for love in all the wrong places. Start to look where it can be found. Go deep into the silence. Go deep inside and begin to find what you're looking for. For crying out loud, let go of those rights and writ duties, the Bhagavad Gita says. Let go of those outer commitments. Don't think you're going to find it by working in the temple. Don't think you're going to find it by having your life be this way or that way. Don't think you're going to get it from this position or that. From this relationship or that. From this physical stature or that. Start to look inside. But then they start to talk to, and this is what this topic is. How do we do it? What does it take to do that? And what Christ is saying is, you have to sever the attachment of your heart and mind to outer things. And even last week, in a beautiful passage from the Bhagavad Gita, he says, he's talking about wisdom, humbleness, truthfulness, and harmlessness, patience and honor, reverence for the wise, purity, constancy, and control of self. And he goes on, and then he says, detachment, lightly holding the thoughts of home, children, and wife, those ties that bind most men. Lightly holding. And here Jesus says, that was from the Gita, and here Jesus says, I am come to set a man at variance against his father and daughter, against her mother, and daughter-in-law against the mother-in-law. He that loveth father or mother more than me, that's the problem. He that loveth father or mother more than me, or daughter or son more than me, it's not the loving of others, it's the loving more than the truth, loving more than the self-offering that goes into finding and reclaiming the kingdom inside. That's the problem. And so we have to start the process of letting go of those attachments. Beginning to start to listen from inside to the music that's already there, to the light that's already there, the love that's already there in its fullness, the joy that's already there. And then what happens is as we go into that, we start to fill up with it. We start to fill up with joy right from the source. We start to fill up with love right from the source. And then what happens is our cup runneth over. Our cup fills up to the top and then starts to overflow. And then what happens? It starts to splash on everybody around us. And the joy that we're seeking is pouring through us and beginning to awaken the joy in those around us. People around us start to feel love. They start to remember that love is possible. They see an example of it and they feel it emanating. And that's why these guys are up here. These guys are only up here because they drank so deeply from the cup. They drank so deeply from the source that their cup overflowed and just washes over everybody who looks at them. And their reminder, their call to us is that that's our story. We have to remember that this is possible. And then we have to have the courage to start to go after it. If we truly want to be happy, if we truly want to be full, we have to have the courage to then do the things that set us free. Good news, really good news, is that we're not alone. And really good news is these guys are willing to guide us. They're willing to help us take it step by step. But it's often scary. It's often really terrifying. Oh, I could never do that. How could I let go of my blank? And so they go through and they tell us stories of what it can look like. And they themselves go through in their own awakening. And then in helping others, they show us what it can look like, what it actually has to look like. It's a beautiful story of a young man who was deeply in love with God. And he loved God as the Divine Mother. And he spoke to God constantly inside, but he kept it as a secret in his own heart. And he just said, Divine Mother, when you call me, I will come. When you call me, whenever it is, I will come. And in the course of time, because she didn't call, he kept talking to her, but she didn't call, he got married. And they became pregnant, and she gave birth to a child. And it was at night, and the wife died in childbirth. And the man is despairing of this tremendous loss, and is also, wrapped up in, what do I do now? I have this child. This is an Indian story. This is a story from India. So there's no Social Security, there's no welfare, there's no food stamps, there's just life. And so he's looking at this child, and he's thinking, how do I care for this child? And in that moment, he hears Divine Mother say, now. And what's the reaction? You've got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. Really? I told you I would come the moment you call. I'll come, but What about this child? What about the things that I am responsible to? What about the things that are there that you've given into my care? And so what he does is he says, I will come, but you have to prove that this is your will for me. So he wraps the child up beautifully in a silk, puts it in a basket, and then he goes out into the street and he places the child in the basket out on the street side. And he steps back into the shadows to watch. And of course, feel what his heart must have been feeling. All of the turmoil, all of the pull in every direction. And about that time, a royal carriage comes by. And it's the local Maharani, the local queen. And she's looking out the window, and she sees the basket in the moonlight. And she stops the chariot, and she has the footman go out and fetch the basket, and they look in, and it's, of course, this beautiful child who's just newborn. And she says, find out whose child this is. And they search, and they search, and they search. And he's well hidden, but he's watching. And finally she says, and they say, we can't find anyone. She says, this is the hand of God. All of my life I've yearned to be a mother, and we are barren in our marriage. This is God answering my prayer. And she takes the child and raises the child as royalty. We think that we have to do it. Oh, I'm going to go find God. I have to throw away my friends, my family, everything. We have to cut it off. We have to do it all now. But the story is not that. The story is, okay, God is calling. What do I do? What is the next step? And I'm going to prove that it's God's will because God cares about the child as much as he cares about me or she cares about me. God cares about the whole story. But the problem is we don't typically have the courage. Oh, what about my dog? I could never do that. What about my house? What about my job? What about my children? What about my wife? What about my wife?
Yeah, what about?
End of sermon. No, but what about? And so we never have the courage to find out where God would lead us. We never have the courage to find out what would happen. And yet, Christ's words alone, and echoed by all the masters of all time, seek God first and everything else comes. Find God as the lover and watch what happens. Give yourself body, mind, and soul into seeking God in deep meditation and serving God outwardly. Why do we serve? Why is service such a big message? Because you got to do something when your eyes are open. And if you're not serving, you're being self-indulgent. And you're working against your yoga. You're working against the very pull for wholeness. So if we're serving, then we're self-forgetful even when our eyes are open and we're outwardly active. It feeds and fuels our meditation, and our meditation fuels and feeds our service. There are some great stories of things that we run into. We're all in this room, by the way, because there are individuals who took this to heart. The first and foremost of them for us is, if you want to go back this far in this story, is Jesus, where he said, he's in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he knows what's coming. He's going to get crucified. And he goes and he prays, and he says, really? I think this is a really bad idea. Let this cup pass from me. I'd really rather not do this, right? I think there's got to be a better way. There's got to be something else. I'm sure I can write a better script. And then he listens, and he feels the inevitability of this if he's going to do God's will. And then he says, nevertheless, thy will be done. So the only reason there's a Christianity, the only reason there is a story to tell is because he didn't decide to do it differently. He showed up and rode the whole thing through. And then we go into the story of Krishna, which is a fascinating story. And then we go into the story of Lahiri Mahashaya and his self-offering, and then Sri Yukteswar, and then Paramahansa Yogananda, who is directly related to us, and the unlikelihood of him coming here. I mean, if you read the divine script and you kind of are, turning the pages of the divine script, you see, well, it was inevitable. But if you read the human story, it was completely unlikely. He was just a simple monk running a school for children. It was wildly successful, but he gets a vision. He gets a vision, and that vision says, now is the time to go to America. And that day he put it down. That day he said, okay, God called. I have this child, but I will go. I will do the divine will. There's a cute story of Mother Teresa. She was being interviewed by a journalist, and the journalist says, oh, Mother, I understand you do God's will. And, the question was posed in such a way that it sounded like he was looking for some kind of simpering, oh, yes, I do. She said, well, of course I do. What do you do? What are you doing with your life if you're not serving God's will? If you're not doing what you were born for, if you're not doing what you were created for, what in God's name are you doing? And that's the question. So Yogananda said, sure. And he came, and he had no money. He was a monk. He had no money. He had no resources. He had nothing except the knowledge that this was his to do. And he decided to pray to God to make sure that this was his to do. He prayed deeply enough that Babaji showed up and said, now is the time. All doors are open before you. And even then, he tried to follow Babaji and go back to the Himalaya. Okay, so it's a human tendency. It takes tremendous courage to seek God in the way that we are called to reclaim our wholeness, to reclaim our lives. We have to do it one life or another, and you'll seldom get a more blessed life than to be this close to a true master. So you might want to think about really going after it this life. But it's a choice. It's your choice. But this is the call. He went to the place where the first ship leaving India to the U.S. after World War I. First of all, immigration was extremely difficult. Getting a passport was almost impossible, and the ship was already booked. It's the first ship. And he says, I know I have a berth on the ship. And the guy says, no way, you don't have a ship. They're all full, and you're just this poverty-stricken monk. He says, I have a berth, and it will be first class. And they have this tussle, this war of words. And Yogananda goes back, and by divine providence, his uncle knows somebody who's in the passport department. He gets a passport. His father writes him a check out of the blue. His father says, no way, I'm going to support you. And the next thing you know, he's got a check enough to come over, and he goes back, and he goes to the birther. He says, where is my berth? And the man says, where is your passport? He says, where is my berth? Where's my passport? And they just did this great back and forth, and somebody had canceled on the ship, and it was first class. And he bought the ticket, he came over, he knew nobody, he had no resources, there was nothing except the certainty that this was God's will. He landed, he spoke in front of hundreds, he became a sensation. Doors opened that were beyond imagining because he said yes. And then Swami Kriyananda, the same way, he read Autobiography of a Yogi, and he said, oh my gosh, walked out, got on a bus, and said, I want to be your disciple. When God calls, if we respond, and it's becoming a global movement, and we are part of that movement. And our own happiness is tied to the service that we offer in meditation and becoming still inside, and then to finding ways to share what we find inside with others. That's simple. Of course, if we have a family, and God hasn't said put down the family, then it's in sharing with the family. Mother Teresa is so sweet. She said, I do not pick people up. We met her. So this is from 1991 when we spent some time with her. She says, I do not pick people up on the street because I think it's a good idea, although I think it's a good idea. I don't do it because it's needed, although it's clearly needed. So that I don't do it because I see Jesus in everyone I pick up, although I see Jesus in everyone I pick up. I see my Guru. I see God's presence there. She said, I do it because God told me to do it. And if God tells you to live in a mansion, you should live in a mansion, but you should do what God tells you. And that takes the courage to ask the question deeply, God, what do you want through me? Because whatever I do that you want will help me wake up. Help me reclaim the happiness and joy and love that I've been seeking all of my life. And then Swami Sri Yukteswar, Yogananda's guru, he says, most people come to the spiritual path as if it's a funeral. dragging and sad and stuff. Little realizing it's a funeral of all sorrows. Everything you want comes from this self-offering. Everything you've been seeking, again, the words of Christ. Seek God first, and everything else comes. I have a little something I'd like to share. We have got lots of stories that we're not going to tell today. Maybe another time we'll have a chance. If we spend a lot of time together, they will all come out. But I'd like to do something, and I'd like, if you'll pass these out now, I'd like us to read it together. It takes tremendous commitment and courage. We have to know that it's possible. We have to know that we want it. But then it takes tremendous courage. And this is a beautiful little reading from the Scottish Himalayan Expedition, published in 1951. Until one is committed, there is hesitancy.
Wait.
The chance to draw back. Does everybody have a copy?
No, wait a sec.
If you don't have a copy, raise your hand. Until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, and always ineffectiveness. This is true in meditation. This is true in our inner lives, our outer lives. It's true at all levels. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans. At the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. All sorts of things occur to help one that would never otherwise have occurred. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents and meetings, and material assistance which no man could have dreamt would have come his way. I have learned a deep respect for one of Goethe's couplets, whatever you do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. We're going to go a little anticlimactic for just a moment and build back up real briefly to our final little prayer or little reading. The goal of life and the goal of this courage is not to do things perfectly. It's not to somehow create an edifice that's lasting forever and reflects on us in great ways. It's for us to do the exercises that give us the experiences that help us to remember who we are. Some of my favorite stories and my favorite people throughout all time are people who dared greatly and who, in the course of their lives, you see everything balanced. All the great things that they did and had the courage for, and all of the great hardships that came and accompanied with. But out of it comes the story that God would write through their lives, and out of it comes, if they stay true to the inner goal of awakening in God, the ultimate victory of realization of their oneness beyond all conditions. And that, my friends, is the gift of the path. And that, my friends, is what this world is hungry for and desperately needs. That, my friends, is the answer to the troubles of the world right now. Those who meditate, those who do the will of God. It's not enough to sit in silence. Yogananda was scolded by one of his masters, one of his teachers growing up. He was from the time he was earliest, he was deeply dedicated to finding God and finding truth, but he was scolded by one of his teachers along the way. He said, are you meditating because it feels good? Or are you meditating to find God? Very, very different. You can do a little meditation, it feels just fine, and you'll get lots of little inspirations and stuff. Meditate to find God, and it's a whole different story. What it takes, what it pulls through, and what it gives. I would invite each one of us to think about how can we serve more effectively? How can we listen to what God would have come through us and have the courage to step into it? My own life is a long list since coming to the path, a long list of saying yes to the things in front of me, not because they were convenient, easy, within my skill set. I could see where the outcome would be, things I liked. Most of it has been doing things that were extremely uncomfortable for long, long periods of time until I found the hand of God in them. and that light of God could express through those experiences. And I would say, without doubt, the power of my life and the power of all the lives of people I deeply respect and know in this world and who have an effect in this world comes straight from that courage. The willingness to go far, far beyond what you think is possible. The willingness to ask the question, God, if you're calling me now, what about this child? What about this thing? And to let God have the time and the power to influence that decision, to show His or her care for these other things that would otherwise block you from the things that are calling to you. This is from Whispers from Eternity, and let's just take it inward in joy and freedom. It's number 63, spiritualize all our thoughts and ambitions. O infinite alchemist, spiritualize our weaknesses into strength and our wrong thoughts into right thoughts. Grow thou a flower of divine understanding from every seed of activity. With the magic wand of foresight given by thee, teach us to transmute the ugly imps of selfish ambition into fairies of all serving, noble aspirations. Train, Lord, each stallion of desire to become a champion racing for thine abode. Transform our base ignorance into the gold of wisdom, that it become a liquid stream of spiritual gold, rushing steadily to thy shore. Moment of silence, and we'll have music.
Strong in your courage.